So let's start our West Coast influenced trip with Sputnik Modular with the dual oscillator. We've got two generators. The first modulates the second through this modulation bus, and we can switch in things like AM, amplitude modulation, FM, frequency modulation, and audio or LFO rate of the timbre controls, which is a wave folder. When you let the harmonic section be low, when this goes high, we can get odd or even harmonics added to the input sine wave, which is square, odd harmonics, or saw-like even harmonics. So we can blend between a wave folder and a wave shaper. And we've got attenuverters, which are off in the middle. They invert and amplify the signal to the left, and then just amplify normally, no inversion, to the right. Each generator has its outputs. We get a sine from the first, a selected waveform, which can be a square, ramp, or sine, and a CV out, which is just 0 to 5 volts, as opposed to a -5 to +5 bipolar signal, as you'd expect from an oscillator or an LFO. We can sync the two oscillators. We've got depth control, again with a CV in for the modulation between the two. The second generator's output has a sine, square, and final output, and the final out is what's going through the wave shaping. Let's just check this out. That's our first generator. As you'd expect, the selected wave. And the CV out is just going to be offset, it's not going to sound any different particularly. Then the second out, the sine. This isn't affected by any of the shaping. The square. Again, not affected. And the final out, which is, so let's check out the tones on the timbre. That's the wave folder. Let's change the harmonics to high and listen to the even harmonics. You can hear that sounds like a crossfade to a saw-like wave. Here's the odd harmonics. Much more square-like. Let's take the final out, turn off any modulation, and make generator 1 an LFO. Let's listen to it with FM. See that positive and negative indicator for the signal is also the frequency modulation of this oscillator that we're getting. Here's AM. That sounds like a tremolo. It's the volume now that's swelling in and out. We can also modulate the timbre. Or even all three, or any combination of those switches. We can do this at audio rates, which is where this dual oscillator really comes to life. Here's AM first. Kinda sounds like ring mod. Great for adding overtones because that bass pitch of this second generator doesn't move. Let's try FM. And audio rate timbre modulation. More aggressive with a wave folder. You can also sync the two oscillators. There's loads of potential tones in there. Let's get in there with some modulation, and I'm going to use some LED cables so you can see what this modulation actually is. So there's loads of tones to be had from that thing. Let's move on to the quad VCF and VCA and check out how we can take various outputs into the quad VCF, VCA and get various different low pass gate, filter and VCA combinations. So I've patched various outs from the two generators into the four inputs on the quad VCA and VCF. Now each channel can be a filter, a combination of filtering and a VCA, which is a low pass gate. Its top end reduces as its amplitude does, a really natural sounding decay as the sound decays down to nothing. And a VCA that doesn't affect the tone, just affects the amplitude. Each output has its own manual control. And its own output. But we've got an all output and an odd and an even out. So I'm taking the odd channels, 1 and 3, and the even channels, 2 and 4, and panning these left and right for a stereo image. Here's the 4 ins. So these two are together. And so are these two. Notice the tone and the volume in that combo mode. You can hear they're working together. Let's patch in 4 different sample and holds into the CV in and let this dictate the dynamics within the patch and how these 4 sounds are mixing and merging and modulating together. Now these signals are bipolar, meaning they're positive and negative, so we'll need to offset the low pass gate so that it can move both ways around the knob position. Let's speed up the sample and hold modulation. Now this into a big reverb will be great for sound design and big spacious drones. So let's check that out. And now we're in this big reverb, I'm going to slow down the modulation. And back off to 50-50 dry wet. So let's look at the quad VCF VCA and this combo mode low pass gate in a more traditional Western or more East Coast synthesis kind of way, a more musical way some would say. We're not going to get into a debate about what's music and what isn't, but certainly it's something more keyboard-like, more quantized, more melodic. First, let's check out the low pass gate. This is my sound coming in. I want to demonstrate how these Vactrals work inside the low pass gate by striking this with what's effectively just a short pop, a little trigger and nothing else. You can hear it's not a straight on and off. Let's compare that to the VCA mode. Now let's listen to the ring of that Vactrol in the combo mode. Quite a natural and soft decay. Let's turn this trigger into an envelope. And again, compare that to the VCA. Okay, the top end that's present isn't decaying away, we're just affecting amplitude. But the combo mode rounds off that top end and offers that Vactrol natural decay. Let's set up a melody. So this is a mix of sort of West Coast and East Coast approaches. It's a basic quantized minor chord in terms of the notes available to play, but what's feeding my quantizer external to these modules is a random voltage, which is very much sort of West Coast based idea. Let's expand this by patching in the other oscillator. We'll use input 3 because I'm coming out of the odd output. This is what I'm getting without modulating the LPGs, low pass gates. And let's strike both of those with fairly short envelopes. I'm going to tighten both these envelopes up. Speed up my clock and play with what notes are available on the quantizer, and you can see how we can let random signals create the pitch information for a nice melodic sequence, but with this nice Vactrol response from the low pass gates. So to finish on, we'll look at the quad, function and trigger source, as well as the CV processor. A function generator is a sort of West Coast approach on an envelope generator or an LFO, and these two things are interchangeable. Each of these function generators can be an LFO that we can see will cycle, and we've got the rise and fall or attack and decay times. It'll be a triggered AD envelope or an ASR envelope where the gate length is taken into account, so it will rise, hold a gate and then decay afterwards. So interchangeable LFOs and envelope generators. Here's my sound that's going out to my sound card, and I'm just going to turn up the low pass gate. So here's the LFO straight in. To create some sort of feedback system, so I'm going to set another LFO cycle in, and I'm going to patch that output into the attack time. Let's now set the third one cycling and set that to affect the decay time of the second one. create feedback by patching something that's already affected back into one of the effectors. Let's take our first envelope into decay time on this third envelope. Go further and patch the fourth envelope to affect decay time of the first, but we're going to leave that as a non-looping envelope and actually trigger it from the second one. You're getting this great sort of moving, lifelike feedback system. And if I move these, we can just see that on the LED activity. Now say I want to mix two of these together, and using these stackables we can keep splitting the outputs. Let's take the fourth envelope into our CV processor's input. And we'll also take the third and the first. And we're going to patch the output of the CV processor into the timbre modulation, which at the minute with a manual sweep sounds like this. So I can use a CV processor to fade between these two inputs. It's both. I can invert the first one and offset that. Turned all these envelope times up quite fast just to demonstrate how they're interacting in the video. We can slow these right down for more drone and ambient like pieces, and we'll leave that to play out. Thanks for watching.